The year is 1857, and the city never truly sleeps. It hums, it groans, it breathes, like some ancient beast made of brick, iron, and endless human noise. The smell hits first, a thick blend of coal smoke, rotting vegetables, and sweat that seeps into every cracked window and damp cellar. Then comes the sound, wagon wheels clattering on cobblestone, distant church bells muffled by fog, a baby crying somewhere beneath a broken roof. It is morning in Lower Manhattan, in the heart of what the newspapers call the Bohemian Quarter, though the residents themselves would laugh bitterly at such a name. For those who live here, there is little that feels artistic or romantic about survival. The Bohemian slums of 19th century New York are not the lively cafes of Paris, or the poetic gatherings of Europe's salons. They are a maze of overcrowded tenements, dimly lit alleys, and rooms that smell perpetually of damp wood and human breath. Every building seems to lean inward, as if the weight of misery itself is dragging it down. If you were to walk these narrow streets at dawn, you would see figures stirring in the shadows, women wrapping shawls around their shoulders as they carry buckets to fetch water from a shared pump, men coughing black soot into their palms after a long night at the foundry, children scurrying barefoot across the street with eyes that already look far older than their years. The Bohemians, as the city's upper class mockingly calls them, are not all artists or dreamers. Many are immigrants, Germans fleeing failed revolutions, Irish escaping famine, Italians chasing rumors of gold. They arrive with little more than a bundle of clothes, their pockets lined with hope, and find themselves swallowed whole by this city of contradictions. For every mansion uptown, there are 10 slums downtown. For every fortune made, 100 souls struggle just to wake up alive. Inside one of the tenement buildings, a narrow staircase creaks under the weight of life. The walls are cracked and stained with smoke. Each floor smells of something different: cabbage, tobacco, cheap gin, and despair. The rooms are small enough that a family of 5 might sleep shoulder to shoulder on a single straw mattress. Privacy is a luxury. Warmth a miracle dot in the corner room on the 3rd floor. A candle flickers weakly against the chill. A man named Anton Weiss, a former typesetter from Prague, wakes with a start. The noise of the street seeps through the walls. Horses neighing, hawkers shouting, someone arguing in broken English. He coughs, rubbing his eyes, and looks around at the room he shares with his wife and child. The window is frosted, the air damp enough to make the floorboards glisten. His wife, Clara, still sleeps beside their son, a thin blanket pulled over them that Anton rises quietly. Mindful not to wake them, he reaches for his jacket, hanging from a nail near the bed, and slides his fingers into the pocket. 2 coins, 1 copper, 1 silver. It is all they have left until the next printing job comes. He breathes deeply, steadying himself, and stares out the window at the street below. The slum outside is already alive with movement. Milkmen shout their rounds, vendors push carts stacked with bruised fruit, and a rag picker drags a cart piled with scrap metal, bottles, and discarded shoes. The dawn light filters through a haze of coal smoke, turning everything a dull gray. From the docks nearby comes the low whistle of a steamboat, signaling another day of trade, toil, and survival. For Anton, survival is both simple and impossible. He dreams of publishing his own newspaper one day, a small thing, written in his native tongue, filled with stories of art, philosophy, and the truth of the immigrant life. But the printing presses of New York are not kind to dreamers. They are run by men who care more for profit than poetry, who pay by the line and dock your wages if you dare to rest your hands thou so. Each day, Anton walks north to the print shop on Mulberry Street, where he sets type until his fingers bleed, breathing in the metallic dust of lead and ink. The work is steady, but the pay barely feeds them. And in this neighborhood, food is not guaranteed. It is scavenged, borrowed, or bought in desperation. At the corner market, the price of bread rises again. The baker, an Irishman named McKenna, shrugs when Anton protests. Blame the dockmen, he says. They're striking again. Everyone blames someone else. The dock workers blame the merchants. The merchants blame the immigrants. And the immigrants, they blame no one. They simply keep moving, because standing still means starving. By midday, the narrow streets become a river of humanity. Children dart between carts, selling newspapers for a penny apiece. Women wash clothes in the gutters, their hands red from the cold. A group of men gather near a pub, arguing in half a dozen languages about politics, about revolutions, about whether freedom in America is truly free. Above them, from the tenement windows, laundry flaps like weary flags. Shirts, trousers, sheets all faded to the same lifeless gray. The Bohemian Quarter has its rhythm, chaotic but constant. There are moments of laughter amid the misery, a fiddle playing in the tavern, a child chasing a stray cat, an old woman telling fortunes for a penny. These are the small rebellions against despair, the only luxuries they can afford. As the sun sinks, the city changes color again. The lamps flicker to life, fed by gas that hisses softly through the pipes. Shadows lengthen in the alleys, and the sound of the city deepens. Now it is the sound of taverns filling, of carriages rolling uptown, of footsteps echoing through streets that seem to twist endlessly inward. Anton returns home, his shoulders aching, his mind heavy. The printing shop has been slow, and the foreman says there may be no work next week. He hands Clara the coins he earned, and she smiles faintly, though she knows it will not be enough. Their son, Jacob, clings to her skirt, asking if they can buy apples tomorrow. Anton nods, even though he knows the answer. Night settles thickly over the city. From the street below, laughter rises, rough, drunken, desperate laughter that spills out of the taverns and into the smoky air. Somewhere, a police whistle blows. Somewhere else, a man cries out in pain. The slums of New York do not rest. They only quiet down, briefly, before the next wave of life begins again. As Anton lies down beside his family, he stares at the ceiling. The candle has burned low, its wax pooling like melted time. He closes his eyes, and for a moment, he imagines another world, a world where words are worth more than wages, where a man can write the truth without starving for it. But the city, ever restless, has no patience for dreams. Outside, the fog rolls in from the harbor, wrapping the Bohemian Quarter in its gray, suffocating arms. The wind whistles through the cracks in the walls, carrying with it the faint sound of the river and the endless hum of humanity, alive, suffering, enduring. In the dark, the slum breathes, and so does Anton, one more so swallowed by the city that both kills and keeps him alive. The city never offers silence. It only changes its voice. By dawn, the clamor of horse hooves and market cries fades into the steady hum of labor, the rhythm of hammers, the shriek of saws, the hiss of steam from the nearby factories. To live in the Bohemian slums of 19th century New York is to exist inside that noise, to breathe it, to let it shape the tempo of your thoughts. For the poor, the sound is both a curse and a reassurance. It means the city is still alive, and if the city lives, perhaps it might too. But beneath that hum lies something more fragile, a quiet, invisible rebellion of spirit. It takes the shape of music drifting through the narrow alleys, of poems scribbled on the backs of newspapers, of sketches drawn with coal on the walls of dimly lit rooms. These acts are not meant for galleries or readers. They are gestures of survival, art as defiance, beauty as a shield against the slow erosion of dignity. The Bohemian Quarter is often mocked by the city's elite as a place of laziness and chaos. But step inside one of its cramped taverns late at night, and you'll see another truth. The air is thick with tobacco, smoke, and laughter. A fiddler plays in the corner while men and women debate politics in a mix of English, German, and Italian. Some argue about the coming elections, others about Marx and revolution, and others still about the latest tragedy printed in the penny press. Yet beneath every conversation runs the same undercurrent, a desperate longing to be seen, to matter, to prove that even the poor have minds that burn brightly. One of these taverns, known only as the Lantern, sits hidden behind a row of tenement buildings near Bleecker Street. Its wooden floorboards are worn smooth by years of restless feet. Its walls lined with newspapers and sketches pinned by dreamers who can't afford canvas. The owner, an old Czech named Joseph, keeps the place open long after midnight, pouring whiskey for anyone who can pay and sometimes even for those who can't. Inside, you'll often find Anton Weiss, the weary printer from earlier, sitting at a corner table with other workers, tailors, painters, failed musicians. Between them sits a single candle, guttering in the draft. The talk is not of wealth or fashion, but of ideas, freedom, injustice, poetry, and the cruel absurdity of the human condition. They are men and women whose hands are calloused, whose clothes are patched and worn, yet whose minds wander far beyond the narrow streets that confine them. Anton listens more than he speaks. He watches the light flicker on the faces of his companions and thinks of how each of them carries within them a world no one else will ever see. There is Clara the seamstress, who once embroidered for aristocrats in Vienna, but now stitches torn coats for a few cents a day. There is Matteo, an Italian mason who recites Dante between sips of gin, his accent thick but his words sincere. There is Ruth, an Irish girl barely 20, who writes verses on scraps of butcher paper and dreams of publishing them one day. None of them call themselves artists, yet each is trying, in their own way, to preserve something sacred, the belief that poverty can steal your comfort but not your soul. Outside, the streets tell another story. The newspapers speak of crime waves in the slums, of gangs like the Dead Rabbits and the Bowery Boys, of fires that consume entire blocks of tenements. The police patrol in pairs, suspicious of every gathering, every foreign accent. To the city's upper classes, the Bohemian Quarter is a place of danger, a dark wound festering beneath the glittering new skyline of Fifth Avenue. But the residents know better. Yes, there is danger from disease, from hunger, from the constant threat of eviction. Yet, there is also community here, a bond forged by shared struggle. If a family loses their home to fire, neighbors take them in. If a child falls ill, others share what little medicine they have. The slum, for all its squalor, holds a kind of fierce compassion that the rich will never understand. Still, compassion does not fill the stomach. By the 1860s, food prices have soared. Meat is a luxury, bread a struggle. Many live on potatoes, cabbage soup, and coffee so thin it's more water than warmth. In the evenings, families gather round stoves that burn whatever scraps of wood or coal they can find. The smoke seeps into their lungs, coating the walls with soot. Illness spreads, cholera, typhus, consumption. When someone dies, the news travels quietly, almost routinely. Another neighbor gone, another name whispered in the dark. And yet, life persists. Somehow, it always does that. There's a strange, haunting poetry in the slums, where laughter echoes in the same alleys that smell of death. A woman sings a lullaby in Czech as she rocks her child to sleep, her voice soft against the distant noise of factory whistles. A boy carves tiny figures out of wood he finds near the docks. A man paints the skyline he can never afford to live in. These are small miracles, invisible to history, but essential to the soul of the city. On certain nights, the lantern hosts what they call poetry evenings. There is no stage, no spotlight, just a circle of tired people gathered around a single table. Someone reads aloud a verse they wrote, voice trembling with both fear and pride. The room listens. They nod, they smile, sometimes they cry. For a moment, the walls of the slum disappear. For a moment, they are not the poor, the forgotten, the unwashed masses. They are thinkers, creators, human beings who dare to feel deeply in a world that demands they feel nothing at all. Anton often reads last. His poems are simple, born of exhaustion and quiet rage. He writes of the printing press, of ink-stained hands, of a city that feeds on dreams. When he finishes, there is silence. Then Joseph, behind the bar, claps once, slowly. Others join in, softly at first, then louder. It is not applause for brilliance, but for bravery, for the courage to still believe in words. When words no longer paid that outside, the wind howls through the alleyways. Somewhere nearby, a drunk stumbles and shouts at the night. But inside the lantern, warmth lingers, a fragile warmth. The kind that flickers like a candle flame, but refuses to die out over time. Whispers spread that artists and writers from uptown have begun to visit the corridor. They come out of curiosity, looking for authenticity, for the rough beauty of the poor. Some bring sketchbooks and notebooks, capturing scenes of poverty as if they were exotic curiosities. A few mean well. Most simply wish to feel dangerous for an evening. They call it Bohemia, not realizing that for those who live here, it is not an art movement. It is survival. Anton and the others watch them with a mix of amusement and resentment. The visitors drink their cheap whiskey, scribble their notes, and leave by midnight, returning to their warm homes and comfortable beds. The residents remain, cleaning the tables, counting coins, wondering if the rent collector will come tomorrow. And yet, some good emerges from this uneasy exchange. A few sympathetic writers begin to document the conditions of the slums in earnest, exposing their realities to the wider world. Reformers take notice. Newspapers begin to print stories not just of crime, but of courage, of families who endure, of communities that hold together against all odds. Slowly, imperceptibly, the public image of the slums begins to shift. Not entirely. Poverty is still condemned, but a flicker of empathy appears in the city's consciousness. For Anton, that flicker is enough. He knows the city will not change overnight. The landlords will still raise rents. The factories will still exploit. The streets will still claim their share of the loss. But he also knows that as long as there are voices willing to tell the truth, as long as there are words that refuse to die quietly, the soul of the slum will endure. And so he keeps writing. Every night, after the press has stopped, after his son has fallen asleep, he sits by the window and writes by candlelight. His words are small, trembling things, but they are his. They are proof that even in the darkest corners of New York, the human spirit still dares to speak. Outside, the fog curls around the rooftops. The lamps burn low. The city murmurs in its sleep. Somewhere, a new day begins to stir, and with it, another chance, however small, to survive with dignity intact. By the late 1870s, New York had begun to glitter, but only from a distance. From the polished balconies of Fifth Avenue, the city seemed to gleam with prosperity and promise. Carriages rolled by with fine horses, their hoofs striking music on the cobblestones, and the street lamps threw golden halos on the faces of the rich. Yet a few miles south, below the elevated train lines, down in the crowded heart of the Lower East Side, the light never reached the same way. There, among the crooked alleys and damp cellars, the city whispered in a different tone, rough, weary, almost mournful. This was still the Bohemian Quarter, though by now it was hardly romantic. Its people had survived wars, depressions, and epidemics, and what remained was a community shaped by endurance rather than beauty. The buildings leaned with age, the bricks dark with soot, the air heavy with the smell of coal smoke and sweat. Children played barefoot in the streets, dodging horses and carts, while their mothers sold bread, mended clothes, or took in washing to feed the family. At night, the tavern still hummed with talk and music, but the laughter had grown thinner, tempered by years of disappointment. The slums had become both cradle and coffin for dreams, for many like Anton Weiss, the old printer-poet. Survival was no longer a fight against hunger alone. It was a fight against forgetting. So many of his friends had vanished into the gray mist of the city. Some had found work in factories and never returned to the lantern. Others had fallen to sickness or drink. A few had joined reformers' movements, marching in protest that the newspapers mocked or ignored. And some simply disappeared, swallowed by the anonymity that New York offered so easily to the poor. Andon's own body had begun to weaken. His hands, once steady on the press, trembled slightly now. The ink stained his fingers as it always had, but the words he printed seemed to matter less. The city wanted headlines, scandal, crime, politics, not poetry. Still, he wrote, in the quiet hours of dawn, before the printing room filled with the clatter of machines. He would sit by the window and write small verses about the world he saw. He wrote about the street sweepers who began their work before sunrise, about the women who sold flowers outside the churches, their hands raw from cold, about the rag pickers who moved like ghosts through alleyways, sifting through trash for anything of value. His poems were not elegant, not the kind that would be read in parlors or printed in the Times, but they were honest, and honesty, in that world, was a rare luxury. One winter, a journalist from uptown visited the Lantern. He was young, idealistic, and freshly educated, with a notebook full of questions. He wanted to see what he called the true face of the city. Joseph poured him whiskey, and Anton, amused, watched as the young man scribbled furiously while listening to stories of slum life. He asked about wages, about sickness, about crime. He seemed genuinely shocked by what he heard. When he left, Anton thought little of it. Such visitors came and went. But a month later, the journalist's article appeared in print. It was long and passionate, describing the tenements in vivid detail, the crowded rooms, the open sewers, the starving children. For the first time, the plight of the Bohemian Quarter reached readers who had never dared walk its streets. The article caused a stir. Reformers began to speak louder. Charitable societies multiplied. The city's conscience, long dormant, stirred uneasily and it slept out of course. Change did not come overnight. Landlords resisted, politicians hesitated, and those in power still preferred to look away. But the conversation had begun, and once a truth is spoken aloud, it cannot easily be silenced again. The slums had finally been seen, not as curiosities, but as wounds that needed healing. Through all of this, Anton continued to print words. Sometimes, he printed pamphlets for reform groups. Other times, he helped immigrants write letters home. His tiny shop, lit by a single oil lamp, became a quiet sanctuary for those who needed words. Any words to hold on to. On the walls hung old sketches, yellowed poems, and faded newspapers. Together, they formed a patchwork memory of a place that refused to vanish quietly. The years rolled forward, and with them came progress. Slowly, the city introduced housing laws. Streets were paved, sanitation improved, and new buildings replaced the collapsing tenements. The factories moved farther uptown. The Bohemian Quarter changed faces. Some of its residents moved on, others adapted, and new waves of immigrants arrived from Russia, Poland, and the Balkans. The same narrow alleys that had once echoed with German songs now carried Yiddish prayers and Balkan folk tunes. The city was always changing, always swallowing one generation to make room for the next. By the 1890s, the old Bohemia was almost gone. The taverns closed or transformed into cafes. The lantern, too, disappeared one winter, replaced by a small tailor's shop. No one knew where Joseph went. Some said he returned to Prague, others that he died quietly, buried in the potter's field. Anton grew older, his beard silvering, his back stooped from years at the press. Yet, in his heart, he felt no bitterness. He had lived through the city's darkest hunger and watched it learn, however slowly, to care. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the rooftops, Anton walked down Bleecker Street and paused where the lantern once stood. Children ran past him, laughing. A woman sold roasted chestnuts nearby, the smell rising warm in the cold air. He closed his eyes and could almost hear the echoes, laughter, music, the soft murmur of dreamers talking of freedom long ago. The past was gone, but its spirit lingered like smoke after a fire. He thought then of all the forgotten souls, Clara, Ruth, Mateo, and all the nameless ones whose faces time would erase. Their lives had not been easy, but they had mattered. They had built the heartbeat of the city with their sweat, their sorrow, and their stubborn hope. The rich might claim credit for New York's grandeur, but it was the poor who gave it life. As twilight deepened, Anton sat on the stoop and watched the streetlights flicker to life. A young boy approached, curious about the old man with ink-stained fingers. "What do you do, mister?" the boy asked. "I print stories," Anton replied softly. "Are they about heroes?" the boy asked again. Anton smiled. "Yes," he said after a moment, "but not the kind with crowns or swords. Mine are about people like you, people who keep going." The boy nodded thoughtfully, then ran off into the fading light, and Anton, left alone, looked up at the darkening sky and felt an odd sense of peace. The city was changing, yes, but it was still alive, still restless, still full of those quiet, invisible heroes who carried on when the world forgot them. Years later, when reformers and historians spoke of the old Bohemia, they did so with nostalgia, as though it had been a quaint chapter in the city's growth. They called it a birthplace of culture, of free thought, of art among poverty. They rarely mentioned the hunger, the filth, the despair. Yet the truth, the real story, lay not in the romantic image, but in the endurance that made it possible. The slums of New York were never merely places of misery. They were crucibles of creation, where music, literature, and activism grew from the cracks of hardship. They were schools of humanity, teaching those who lived there the true price of empathy and the strength it takes to hope. Every tenement was a testament, every alleyway a silent hymn to survival. And though the buildings would crumble, though the people would fade into history's margins, their legacy endured in the city itself, in the rhythm of its streets, in the art that followed, in the stubborn pulse of every generation that refused to bow to circumstance. The candlelight may have gone out in the lantern long ago, but its glow still lived, flickering softly in the memory of a city that once learned, painfully and beautifully, what it meant to be human.